People love the yamaka. Yeah, people love it. I mean, it was very visible on the sidelines. So obviously, like all the cameras always pick it up, and they love doing that. I mean, it's a very very visible. And it's very obvious to who I am.
Welcome, everybody. This is Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Today, I have an incredible guest that I'm interviewing, and his name is Sam Salz. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Texas, right?
Yep, yep. Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
So I found your story interesting because we live in a time when a lot of Jews are feeling very uncomfortable about visibly being Jews and visibly showing their Judaism. And here you are, a new player on the football team of A&M in Texas, Texas college football, and you go on there wearing your kippah and you're proudly Shabbat observant. So I found that quite refreshing, so refreshing to have that a person who's proud of their Judaism and actually shows it very visibly. Can you tell us first of all a little about your journey, how you got to play football, to play on the Texas A&M
Yeah.
team?
So my journey
Mm.
has been very interesting, I would say. I think because I didn't play football growing up, or played football in high school, which is probably a main requisite for playing football in college, or I would say is a main requisite for playing football in college. So I didn't play football growing up at all, aside from in gym class or with my friends. But aside from that, it wasn't really like anything on the uh, organized scale where there were pads and there were plays and there was everything. So
Mm.
I didn't really have that experience. But when I got to college, there was something in me that had been, in a sense, like kind of reborn, like an idea that I had when I was younger that I should play college football. And as I began my journey in training to make the team, I learned a lot about why I was doing it, and a lot about just spirituality and Hashem. And I began to grow, I would believe, as a person, as a Yid, as a Jew. And it
And you
was,
felt that you were growing from being on the college football team?
well, I was growing from the journey at first,
Mm.
because I mean I wasn't even there on the team at the beginning. I was, going through
Right.
the journey of working on making onto a team, which is, for those of you don't know, for someone to not make it onto a call, or who not have played football in high school and then to make it onto a Division 1 college football team at our division is a very rare feat.
Right.
It almost never happens. So, and coming, especially as someone who's coming at 5'5", it's really a stroke of Hashem, I would say,
Oh, wow.
that happened in the first place. But I was training, and I began to train, and I had become acquainted with the head coach through going to his radio shows. And after that, I also began to train outside the facility every day. And after a good, I would say, about 11 months of training and 9 months of training outside of the facility, halfway through the season, they gave me a call and they gave me a chance to come on the team. That was last year in October of 2022. And thank God I've been there since.
That's
And
incredible.
yeah,
So what did it take? It took sounds like it takes a lot of perseverance and a lot of training. I mean,
yeah,
how much time are you training?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so my training per day at that time was, I would say, it was about 4.5 hours.
Wow. Wow.
That on average, it was somewhere ranging between probably about 4 to 5. But then obviously I had to eat and I had to teach myself about football, so that also was about another 2 hours a day. So that
Mm.
the I would say the full dedication of my day to football was about 7 hours.
That's incredible. And you didn't even know at that point that you would get on the team. I mean, it was an unlikely shot, no?
Yeah, ultimately, yes and no. So I mean, I was kind of like, in a sense, shooting a little bit in the dark when it would come to, I would say, the average person thinking about it would be kind of like a shot in the dark. To me, obviously, my journey was all about Hashem and Judaism. So my thought process was completely different, which is like one of those things that I learned through this journey, was that my thought process completely changed, and I understood that for me to accomplish this goal, I really had to rely completely on Hashem, or God, for those of you guys who may not be so acquainted with the lexicon. But it
So
really
tell
changed
us
my
more
perspective.
about that. Like how did God play a role in your
Yeah,
in this journey?
absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, first and foremost, I think the most obvious and most standing op vi the most standing example of this is the fact that I'm on the team. I mean,
Mm,
I would say that's the most, because there's so many things that you can do as a person. You can work as hard as you want and or as you can. You can control at least for certain factors, but ultimately you can't control for how people perceive you in certain respects, right? You can always be a respectful person. You can always be a good, hardworking person, but in some respects, you can't really control being in the right place at the right time. You can't control how people are going to necessarily look at you, right? We learn in the parsha or the Torah portion of I want to say in Va'era, I want
mhm,
to say, and the ensuing Torah portions later after that about the plagues, where
mhm. In Egypt.
right, exactly, where the plagues
Mhm,
in Egypt. So during the Exodus, where God hardens Pharaoh's heart,
mhm.
right, and that's a thing, is that people that you're the way that people perceive you and act towards you, that's all within your connection to God, and uh, not even.
How's that? Like, why do people perceive you with your how does it work? How
I
do you
mean,
see it working?
I would say that ultimately it kind of deals with energy and the way that you put things out. Um,
Mm,
because there's a way that you can put things in it that's positive and things that's in a way that works in a negative way. And for you to be perceived well by others is very important. And you have, in some respect, you do have control over that, right? Again, you can be a respectful person. You can, in a sense, I guess, open doors for people. You can always be courteous. But at the end of the day, you don't have final control, right? And really
mhm,
in anything that you do, right? Ultimately, like nobody has control whether they're going to wake up and be able to walk tomorrow.
mhm.
Nobody has control. Realistically, when we're talking about it, nobody has control over, in a sense, anything on a full level within their lives. Not
That's
you don't
true.
you and in terms of your perception on people, you always don't even have a control over either, right? Because sometimes your anger can take over, or your joy can take over, and you can perceive someone in a completely different light. So
Right.
in some respect, right, we all enlist the help of God in having in perceiving people in the correct way, and on the converse, in other people perceiving us the correct way.
I see. So you're saying that your involvement with God, your relationship with God throughout your journey of training for the football team was one of where you felt his where you felt reliant on him, you felt your faith in him.
I felt, yeah, absolutely, because again the goal that it was such an in many people's eyes, it wasn't my eyes, but it was, I would say, in many other people's perspectives, kind of like an outlandish goal. Like, how are you going to do that?
Mm,
Or it's like it's almost
mhm,
impossible. And
mhm,
ultimately, when it comes to fulfilling things that are impossible, I think that's when people rely most on God, because that's what
mhm,
truly it takes, right? No,
mhm,
no, right? Like I said, you can control for certain things, but you
mhm,
can't control for most things. And ultimately, that really comes from God. And the other thing is that everything that I needed, right? People being there at the right place at the right time, right? For coaches saw me training on the field. If they weren't, didn't see me, right? They had to be in the right place at the right time. Like I had to be in the right place at the right time, right?
mm,
It's not like I'm placing myself at the center of the universe, right? Everyone else is in the center of their own universe, but right, for those
right.
universes to essentially come together, I would say there's a lot of divine intervention that comes with that. There was a time when I was training and I needed someone to throw with, and I didn't have someone to throw with, and I prayed about it, because I really needed the help and I needed the training. And after I prayed about it, legitimately the next day I was training on the field, and this random guy who I had very barely seen at Chabad events when I was at my Chabad on campus, and he walked by and he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and he began to throw with me, and really everything for me
Mm,
was provided by God. I mean, whenever even I was having an off day, because everybody deals with that, everyone deals with maybe doubts or something like that, God provided, a little glimmer of hope. I was there were times where I was training on the field, and I just needed something like to uplift me, and maybe like a coach would walk by and like give me a high five or something like that. Like there were those things, like I say, that ultimately everything revolves around the control of God, right?
Mhm.
And that's something that I really had to understand and accept that, right? Aside from that, like doing things for the right reasons, doing things for holy purposes, and and the above is essentially what provides the most meaning and value to things that you do. So
It's
it was really a journey of self discovery and reflection.
wow. So, I mean, you were putting forth a lot of effort on your own, but you came to the realization, the recognition that it was really God who was putting the pieces together. You know,
Yeah,
you do your
absolutely.
effort, but God is running the world and putting it all together.
Yeah.
That's did you always have such an awareness? Did you always, or was it something that hit you specifically now with this goal
Um.
of trying to get
So
onto the team?
I would say the awareness was there. I don't think the awareness was as great as it was, though. I mean, ultimately, like Baruch Hashem, since I've been a child, I think that I've always had a high level of faith. I think that's
Mhm.
just been a natural characteristic that I've had. However, I will say that through this process, it definitely grew that because again, it's it's when you're going toward a goal and you can perceive that you have some sort of control towards accomplishing it, it's easy to kind of get stuck by the wayside in the sense where it's like, okay, well, I have kind of sense, I don't really need God to help me with this, right? But that's
Mhm.
not true. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, right, you thank God for
For
everything.
waking
I
up.
mean,
Right.
exactly. I mean, you
Right.
thank God for returning your soul to you. You thank God, and on even on like a level that's not as spiritual, you thank God for the clothes that you have, right? You
Mhm.
thank God for just making you the way you are. Like you thank God for all those little things, and that's something that I really begin to understand is that really nothing in this world revolves outside of God's control, and in fact, as a person, nothing really in the world is within your control. You're kind of operating in a state of, I would say, kind of good standing, where as long as you're doing your best to accomplish your purpose and your goals in life, you're gonna enlist help, and especially if I always would compare it to kind of an investment. If you're putting your best foot forward and putting everything that you can into something, right, then you're going to garner an investment, right? Then you want that investment from God. In Hasidic philosophy, it talks about being a vessel for blessing, right? Creating a vessel for blessing. And that's ultimately what it is, right? If you create the vessel, then the blessing will fill it. The vessel is
Mhm.
you, right? And the blessing, in a sense, is the
Right.
same way. It's like an investment. If
Wow.
you want to talk about it in business terms or in terms of any sort of investment in life. So that's I mean, it really taught me a lot about that. And again, because I was going on a goal that was like it was so much different, where like I really would need God to help me in that goal and really do most of it, because again, there's you can only control for so much, and I really learned that in that realm, I really had to rely on God. That's really all that there was ultimately. And I mean, there's a way of looking at that where it's like, there's your perspective, there's the outside perspective of the people who, were on the other side living it, right? And they were living their own reality and they were seeing their own things and they were seeing the world in their own eyes. Because ultimately, what it says is that people, it was like that people should act as if the world was created for them. That obviously means that people have a greater mission in life. And because they have a greater mission in life, it's incumbent to do things that, in a sense, are out of an ordinary, that leave an impact in the world, leave an impact on people, and help people live a better life.
So I want to understand a little about how does it work, being a Shabbat observant player on the team?
Yeah,
How does that how do you do that?
that's a very, very good question. So, I mean, the way I maintain that is you kind of have to look at things from a schedule perspective and from a time perspective. So, on a schedule perspective, if you look at it, on average, we're supposed to have about 7 games a season that are after Shabbat. And we have 13 games a season, so 12 regular season games and a 13th, which is hopefully a bowl game, which is when you have a game that, when you have a winning record, you get an extra game that you play, and that game can be anywhere throughout the week as opposed to just being on Saturdays. So the average, if you include that game for us, is 7 games that are played with a Shabbat friendly time, I would say. The
Mhm.
way that it works is that, so say there's a game that's a Shabbat friendly time. I the day before I take third meal, Sudash Lishi, and which is for those of you don't know, there's a meal that is supposed to be had on Sabbath or on Shabbat that is the third meal, right? So you have the first one at night, the second one during the day, and then you have a third one at the time after the
Like
afternoon, right
late
after Mincha.
let like
Yeah,
late afternoon, right?
yeah. That time
Mhm.
around, I guess somewhere around before Shkia, before sunset,
Before
I think.
sunset,
Yeah,
right.
and then into Ben Ishmael and twilight and into the night. So there's a meal that is supposed to be had, and I my Chabad is great enough to pack me a meal that I keep in the fridge at the facility, and then I also keep books of Torah with me at the facility,
At
which
which
I
at the football facility? At which
yeah. So
facility?
at the football facility, so I
Mhm,
keep I put them there before Shabbat starts,
mhm.
and then when I come, I have to be there 2 hours early,
Mhm.
so
How
I
far
sit.
is it? Is it
It's
from
a
your
it's a, it's
from
about a 2 mile walk, I would say.
Mhm, mhm.
But I have my books in the facility, so I can have third meal and I can learn Torah until the sun sets, and then I take a sitter with me or a prayer book. I take that with me so I can do the evening prayer more. And once I do that, I'll get dressed. But I mean, it's ironically it's the most focused time I have to actually study Torah and say
Mhm.
Psalms or Tehillim because it's there's no distractions around me, right? Because either the football game hasn't started or the football game is started and I'm coming out in like the second quarter or like just
Uh-huh.
a little bit late in the first or at some point sometimes in the third quarter like because the game hasn't I mean the game has started like I'm there but I actually have like full and complete ability to focus on learning Torah, which is you know it becomes ironically a spiritual activity in that respect.
Interesting. And I understand that you also have the number 39 as your number on your
Hmm.
uniform. Why did you choose 39?
Yeah, so 39 is a special number to me because I don't play on Shabbat. And 39 is symbolic of the 39 malachot, which are the categories of work that are forbidden on Shabbat. And that happened to be one of the few numbers that was actually available. And I was like, well, this is definitely a sign. So I took 39 and
That's cool.
39 became my number.
Wow,
And
that's cool.
that's
Were you
hmm?
always Shabbat observant?
Yeah, I was raised Shabbat observant.
Interesting. And you wear your yarmulke, your kippah, which yeah, onto the team. Have you got any comments? I mean, it's pretty visible. It's white on your there on your hair.
Yeah.
Have you got any comments from people about that? What was the reaction of
Yeah,
people?
people love the yarmulke. Yeah, people
Yeah.
love it. I mean, it was very visible on the sidelines. So
Hmm.
obviously, like all the cameras always pick it up,
Hmm.
and they love doing that. I mean, it's a very very visible and it's very obvious to who I am.
Hmm.
And my team is like, I mean, I have this one. I have it has my number and my name stitched on the back,
Can
and
you
people
can you
just
show it to us? Can you give
yeah
us a little show?
yeah absolutely. So it is
Oh wow,
right
39.
here. Yeah, and then it
Sounds
has
cool.
Chabad of A&M on the other side. So
Wow.
it's I mean, this one's obviously very, 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 uh, very visible because it's white and it has that, and people love it. I mean, our former athletic director loved them. He thought they were really cool.
Hmm.
So, I mean, just people think it's cool. People, I mean, a lot of people don't understand why we have to wear yarmulke. So, like, first and foremost, you kind of have to explain why we do wear yarmulke. The whole concept of understanding that God is above you.
Hmm.
But I mean, once people do that, they think it's cool, and they think that the customized yarmulkes are even cooler.
Have you faced any anti-Semitism when
No,
you're wearing it? No, really?
no.
Wow. Is the Texas team a very Jewish friendly team? Is there a lot
Yeah,
of Jews on there?
no, there aren't any Jews on there, but I would say that I mean, the guys are great. Like they're very understanding and accommodating and they're supportive of me. I would say that's what it is ultimately.
That's incredible. What would you just say to somebody who is getting like negative anti-Semitic comments about wearing a yarmulke or being openly Jewish?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that those comments are going to be there regardless whether you're wearing a yarmulke or you're being openly Jewish. That's the anti-Semitism exists whether or not you show it. I mean, it's like in Nazi Germany, they didn't just go after. the religious Jews. They went after
Mhm.
all the Jews, or they went after people who had one Jewish grandparent. It might have been the wrong grandparent, but they went
Mhm.
after them. So putting your yarmulke away, or hiding your star, or tucking in your tzitzit is never going to help people's perception of you. In fact, it's probably going to enrage it. It's kind of, for Jews, it's always been this kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't moment,
Mhm.
where it's like, if I try to assimilate, they're going to hate me, and if I'm too different, they're going to hate me. And you have to understand that when it comes to that, you had to stick to your guns and stick to your culture, because that's ultimately what it is. That's ultimately why you're here in the first place.
Mhm.
And the strange thing that anti-Semitism does do, the UP people ask why it exists and why things in this world have utility. The strange thing that it does do is remind people that they are Jewish.
Mhm. That's
That they
true.
remind, and that's the unfortunate utility that it has, is that it reminds people that they are Jewish, and that they are not, in a sense, separated from the crowd just because you're, more liberal Jew, or more conservative Jew, or you're, whatever type of Jew you want to call yourself. It-
Have you had
you mhm.
Go ahead, sorry. No, have you
uh,
had pride from Jews who see your yarmulke and see who you are? Did they
yeah,
feel proud about you
yeah,
being there?
yeah. Thankfully, I mean, that's my goal. My goal is to inspire, and
Mhm.
when I see that's uh, the manifestation of the goal.
Well, what is your like, how do you see that goal? Like, what is your message to teenagers out there,
Yeah.
or people out there?
Yeah, I mean, my goal, I always talk about like a three pronged approach to it, because it's, it's never easy to give like a single straight up answer. But ultimately, I would say, in one word, my goal is to inspire. But in a broader sense, my goal is to obviously inspire, you know, my fellow Jews, and the teenagers especially, and the kids, to be proud of who they are, right? And never give up on their faith to be successful. I want to kind of disprove that, because for a long time in America, this was like kind of the status quo, where it's like, if you wanted to be successful, you had to conform, and you had to give up your faith and your
Mm,
values. And I want to show that this isn't, you don't have to do that. You can be successful because of your values. I mean, we're having this conversation because I'm Shomer Shabbat, right? All the
right.
news do their publications on me because I'm Shomer Shabbat. It's not
Mhm.
right. There's the only reason that I'm known and I'm a public figure is because I keep Shabbat, and I want people to understand that that's why I'm successful, is because of what's in my adherence to the Torah, and my values as a Jew. So
Mhm.
I want kids, and I want teenagers, and even adults, to understand that you are never going to not be successful by being proud of who you are, and being true to your values.
Mm,
So that's the first part. The second part is, obviously, I want people to be inspired to live the life that they are supposed to live, like, in where everyone has a goal that they're born, or a purpose that they're born with, and I want people to fulfill that purpose. I want people to understand why they're here. I don't want people to think that the only fulfillment of life is, a 9 to 5, I mean, listen, if that's your purpose, that's your purpose. But I want people to use their unique things to better the world, and make it, and serve Hashem with their talents. Like, those are what I want. I want people to be inspired to follow, in a sense, their dreams, and to
mm,
accomplish the things that people told them they weren't going to be able to accomplish.
mm.
Or
And that's what you're doing with your playing in the football team.
exactly.
Wow. And your third prong, was there a third one?
So the third one was, it was inspiring. It was inspiring, through Judaism. It was inspiring. The third one was, I mean, on the other converse, is that for many young Jewish kids, the world in terms of sports is not always super, I would say, forgiving, and
Mm,
I would say a lot of that even comes internally. I think a lot of the times it's not always the outside world telling Jewish kids that they're not going to succeed in sports. I think it's more the
mm,
inside world that's telling them, oh, you're good, you have a better chance of, owning the team. People always make that joke or make that comment, but I want people to understand that, we fully have the capability to do that, and to be
mhm,
successful in sports. and and again, in a sense, not just sports, but I do want to dispel these notions that I would say have been created in the modern American image of Jew, which is
Mm,
the Jew is weak. The Jew, is not good at sports, which are notions that are just false objectively.
right.
And I don't think it's good that we're teaching our kids that we're weak and we're bad things. That's not true. I mean, earlier in the 20s, I believe it was, I think 20% of boxing champions or something like that were Jewish, right? I mean,
Interesting.
this is something I just learned in a sports management class. Interestingly enough,
Mm,
I mean, there was a large amount of Jews in have been successful in hockey, and you know, there is a lot of success that's possible within these
mm,
realms. And
mhm.
it's more than just sport. I think it goes just deeper than sport. Like I said, I don't want Jewish kids growing up thinking that they're weak and just fit to be like an intellectual or a doctor and a lawyer, because obviously the
Right.
intellectual parts of Judaism are very important. Don't get me wrong, because I learn Torah every day, right.
Mhm.
Ultimately, people, whether people call it an intellectual pursuit or not, I mean, I call it a godly pursuit, because I think that's what it is ultimately,
Mhm.
where you're bettering your connection with God. But there is an intellectual aspect to it, which is very
Right.
important within Judaism. But people also neglect that within Judaism, there's very large physical aspects that exist to it, and not in the sense of like, the way that the Syrian Greeks or the Yavanim in the Hanukkah story are characterized, but in the sense where there are laws within that pertain to the physical realm, and how you contain yourself in the physical realm, and how you do keep yourself healthy. I mean, in
Mm.
the beginnings of I've really been learning the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch recently, and it talks about keeping your body healthy. We say a
Keeping
Asher
yourself
Yatzar,
healthy.
right?
Right.
We say a Asher Yatzar to do all those things, and then, like I said, we can't characterize ourselves as weak. It's not healthy. It's not true. There's so much within Jewish history that would prove otherwise. I mean, if you look at our history when it comes to the Hanukkah story, which is, I gave this speech during CT, and I want to just reiterate this, because I think this is really important for people to hear. But during the Hanukkah story, like, that historically did happen. It's not a mythical thing. It's the most celebrated holiday. Most people don't really know what happened, but there was a large amount of Jews that were becoming Hellenized, and on the other side there were the Syrian Greeks who were
Mhm.
pushing this Hellenization, and a small group of priests banded together and brought together other Jews, and together, obviously with Hashem, they completely vanquished the Syrian Greek army and established independence for themselves. And in the Purim story, where we're coming up on, the Jews, at the end of it, it says like 70,000 of like their enemies were killed or something like that.
Mhm.
Uprise against their enemies who are trying to kill them. And it's like,
Mhm.
there was no characterization of Jews ever being weak then. There was no characterization, especially when the Romans came. People, when we were kids, it always seemed like the Romans took us over. But like, upon looking at history, right, I actually looked it up, that after the Hashmonean dynasty was established, the Romans came, but they didn't really want to deal with the Jews, and so they established a puppet governance.
Mhm.
And they were mostly fine with the Jews, right, until
Mhm.
later on, when it still took them 5 months, right. And this is like the Roman army that everybody always talks about, with the
Talks about
military
right.
tactics and the strength,
Right.
and the leadership, people, and especially under Titus, who was the one
Right.
who ended up sacking the temple. But like, if you're looking at this Roman army, that people, again, they always talk about it
Look
being
at
the
us
best,
so
some of the
strong.
best,
Right.
right, exactly.
Right.
But
So you don't
right,
so you don't want people to look at Jews as weak. You don't want Jews to look at you want us to be
no,
strong. You want
yeah,
us to
and
be able to
right,
do whatever we want to do, not to be boxed
right,
into any kind of and yet you're also inspired by your connection to God. You feel God is the
yeah.
one that does
that's
everything.
that's ultimately what it is. I mean, because, like, if you look at through all these stories about history, it's like there's a large army that are quite strong. I mean, the Greeks also were not a weak army, and
Mhm.
here you are, this band of small Jews that have belief in God and belief, in their way of life, and that's ultimately what
Who succeeds, right?
person,
That's what
right? Exactly. And like that was the thing, that army by Titus, how, you know how many months it took them to take down Jerusalem, which at the time
right,
was within a civil war itself, and starving because the storehouses were burnt.
right.
It took 5 months for them to do that.
Wow, wow.
And
Let
this is a very large rebellion. It's a not talked about enough.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, how do you deal with, I mean, you're talking about successes. How do you deal with disappointment? How do you deal with disappointment in your life or when you haven't succeeded? I mean, you succeeded to get on the team, but what do you do when you have a disappointment? How do you look at it that way?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I try my best to look at things from the positive perspective.
Mhm.
I mean, th- there was I grew up around Chabad, so there's a lot of I would say influence from the Rebbe's teachings
Well,
on.
can you tell us a little bit more about your connection to Chabad? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
you have it on your yarmulkes. You have the seteen, you
yeah. So
have
I
the
mean, obviously, I'm very active at the one here on campus. I was in C
Mhm,
team when I was a teenager, but I mean, even like way before that, I grew up around two pairs of Chabad shluchim. So I grew up going to one shul, which at that when I was growing up was actually an Ashkenazi shul that had a Chabad rabbi, and then it became a Chabad later. And then
uh-huh.
on there was a second shul that we all
That
went.
was where that was in
It doesn't
Philadelphia?
feel in Philadelphia, yeah, but Abraham
Mhm,
Chabad. So I grew up with the
mhm,
rabbi and Leah Goldman, and obviously I'm thankful for my relationship with them. I
mhm,
believe it's very foundational to who I am.
mhm,
And yeah, I mean I grew up around them, and I grew up around Rabbi and Chava Schmidt on who were also in Philadelphia. Their shul was a block away from Ben Abraham, which is the shul that I went to, where I go to back when I'm in Philly. And I was that perspective, I believe, really did find a large place in my life. And the
mhm,
perspective on especially this teaching of the rabbis, like having the positivity bias, that's kind of seeped into the way that I do things. So when I look at things in life, I do my best really not to look at it from a disappointment level, but I look from a why is it happening kind of perspective,
mm,
right?
mhm,
What did I do, or why is it supposed? What's the utility, right? What's the purpose for such a thing happening? What's this going to teach me? So what I've learned is this lesson, ironically, from I believe it was the Parsha 2 weeks ago, where Moses asks to see God's face, and God says, "Nobody can see my face and live, but I'll show you my back." And the lesson that I always hold on to from that is that, and when something happens, you don't understand why it's happening, but in retrospect, you're going to be happy that it's happening. So, like, you can never
mhm,
understand why God does things at face value when it's happening to you. And that's just because humans are finite in knowledge and understanding, and our mind doesn't really wrap fully around why things happen because it can't. But
mhm.
when after it happens, right, you'll be like, oh, wait a minute, I'm grateful that it happened, that there was a reason for this
You can
and why
see
it was supposed to
yes.
happen exactly. And in that sense, like, you're kind of seeing God's back, where it's like
Mhm,
that's
mhm.
where the understanding finally comes in. Is it's kind of in the retrospective angle.
Right, right, wow. And of course, you're involved with Chabad now in Texas, Chabad on
Yeah.
campus?
Hmm.
Uh-huh, interesting. What are your dreams for the future? What are your plans or dreams?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, my biggest dream, I would say, is to continue inspiring and spreading my message.
Mhm,
That's ultimately what I want to do. I love speaking. I I mean, publicly, especially. That's something that I would also like motivational speaking. That's something that I would like to get into as a field. Obviously, when it comes to professional football and everything like that, I'm doing my best to get to that stage so I can further my message.
mhm,
I think ultimately, like I said, everything that someone does has to be done with purpose, and there's a reason, right, for why people do things and why things have to be done. And if you align, and you have to align yourself with a godly purpose of doing things. And ultimately, I mean, for me, that's mine. Is that I need to spread my message, and to be on a bigger stage, like being in the National Football League, would allow me, uh, I would say, greater, not just greater audience, but as well as just greater ability to have people come listen to my message. Because again,
mhm,
this isn't really, at the end of the day, it's not about me. Yeah, but I'm grateful enough that I have experienced certain things where I've been able to understand in certain respects how I should operate, how the world operates, and I want to spread that to people. I want people to have faith. I want people to live lives of meaning. I want people to live lives of purpose. And for me, in order for me to spread that, I need a larger platform. That's
Mhm.
ultimately what it is.
So are you looking to national football for your future?
With God's help, yeah.
With God's help. Wow. And I guess you'll still be a beacon of light there with your yamaka and your Shabbos
You know,
observance always. Wow.
absolutely,
Wow, incredible. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the
absolutely.
pride and the joy that you have in Judaism and most of all your attitude to try to use your platform to inspire other people to
Mm,
grow and to be who they can be. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Wow, that was a great interview with Sam Salz. I love when we interview young people, the next generation of people who have such a pride in being Jewish, such a conviction in their Judaism. And I loved how he sees God throughout his journey, how God was helping him to get to where he got, how God was there with him at all times, how he prayed to God for the things that he needed, and he actually saw the answers. And how he just has this Jewish pride in everything that he does, especially out there. And what interested me also was that he didn't feel any anti-Semitism being directed at him. And perhaps it's when we feel that pride of who we are and we understand our mission in life that we can go out there with the courage and the confidence to be who we are. As he said, he hopes to have a greater platform to really teach others to not box themselves in, but to follow their dreams and to really realize how to use their talents to serve God properly. So, if you enjoy watching these podcasts, I hope that you are subscribed to Chabad.org / extraordinary. You will receive these interviews in your inbox, in your email inbox, and you won't miss even one episode. As always, we love to hear from you. Drop us a line, tell us what you think. I read every single comment that comes in, and I appreciate them so much. Tell us what you enjoy and keep on watching. Have a wonderful day.